All right. Well, today we're joined by Dan Peeples here, and he is an industry professional in the funeral home industry. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business?
Okay, so I'm vice president of Julian Peoples Funeral Homes. We have a location in Dalton, one in Rocky Face, and then my cousins have a funeral home in Chatsworth that we kind of help out with a lot too. So basically, three funeral homes that we help serve the community with, but two of those my dad and I own directly. Um, we help people in the community that have a loved one that passes away locally, like in a hospital or their home or a nursing care facility. But based on mine and your conversation the other day, we also have people that unfortunately pass away, like on vacation, and that could be in other states or other countries. Sometimes people get moved to like a cancer facility in Houston, Texas, or something, and then they just pass away there. And then there's the logistics, as you and I were talking on, trying to get them back to our community safely, so that loved ones can still come by the funeral home and pay their respects, then have a respectful service for that person.
That's awesome. Um, can you walk us through basically what happens? Like, let's say somebody passes away locally, what is involved logistically from the time they expire or pass away, um, and the family chooses peoples. What
Okay.
what what happens there?
Okay. Locally, and I tell families this, a lot of times people prearrange their services. Even today, I have someone coming in after lunchtime whose loved one is, this is their words, close to the point of death, and they want to go ahead and get some paperwork and stuff filled out because they know it's going to be emotional um, at that time. So, like, I will tell that family today, whether it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 1 o'clock in the morning, after their loved one passes, they can call our funeral home and we will be there within 30 minutes or so. Um, but also, if it happens at home, I often have to remind people to call the hospice nurse first. Um, well, there's two ways that can happen. If you passed away at home and you were not sick, like if your wife woke up the next morning and you were beside her and you were what we believe are is passed away, then she would need to call 911. But I'm saying if someone is on hospice care at home, they would do that because sometimes people are just tired of being in the hospital. The doctors may have said there's not much else we can do. And people, I know I would, people want to have their final days not in a hospital, but just being at home. And so when that happens, they would need to call the hospice nurse first, and the hospice nurse has to pronounce them deceased. Myself or none of my staff is able to pronounce someone deceased. So it has happened that the families called us. One of my guys rushed to the house, and no one had even pronounced the person yet. So we can't take the deceased person with us, of course. If it happens at a hospital, of course, there's a nurse or a doctor there, or a nursing home. A certain level of nurse can pronounce someone is dead. Just some orderly cannot do it. It has to be, forgive me, I don't know all the nurses' levels, but a certain PRN maybe or something like that can pronounce someone. And after they've pronounced that person, then they call us and we go to the hospital or their home, or, like I said, the nursing care facility. We bring them back to the funeral home. Many times if it's in the middle of the night, I usually wait till the next morning to reach out to the family and ask them if this is going to be like a traditional service where people will come by and view. If there's going to be a public viewing, I need to do the embalming. That's about a 3-hour process. If they're not going to, some families choose not to spend the money for embalming, or if it's going to be a cremation, normally we don't do the embalming. Sometimes the family is at the hospital at the middle of the night, but many times they're not, especially with all the COVID stuff going on now. They don't allow 20 people to be in the hallway waiting for me. So I usually make a call the next morning. So when my guys get back to the funeral home, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, we have a refrigerated cooler room that looks somewhat like the morgue of the hospital, that we keep the body refrigerated till we find out, what kind of service the family wanted.
Dan, there was something that you said just a moment ago that you guys couldn't go out to the home and pick up the remains at that point. Is there any type of licensing or permitting that allows you to carry the human remains? And at what point do you actively start getting involved in that logistics?
Is there legislation that would allow me to do what?
That would allow you to physically carry the body via vehicle? Is that from some of the research that I was doing online? It seems to me that you can't just put a human remain or organs or bodies into any personal vehicle and transport them. Is there any type of certification or licensing that you have to have specifically as a funeral home in order to do so?
Yes and no. It may not be the answer that you really want to hear, but I have a pronouncement of death form. I could go get one in a minute and hold it up for you, but that's kind of our paperwork to go. If we got pulled over by the police, and you're right, you had a deceased body in your vehicle, that pronouncement of form would help. Um, Also, if you go to another state, like if I go to Alabama or Tennessee, I have to have what's called a transit permit. And that is the ability to cross state lines with a deceased body. So I can't leave Memorial Hospital or Erlanger or Eastridge, even as close as those are, without that. But honestly, I, I don't think anyone in my 20 years of working has ever pulled over a hearse. But if they did, and it was a Whitfield County deputy, and he saw my hearse, he sees our stretcher, which looks like an ambulance cot, and we have a blanket over the person, they're just not going to ask any questions. I can see how people would think that. They may already know my face anyway. But as fast as I've driven to try to get to a family, I've never gotten pulled over in the hearse before. So not a lot of questions are asked, but I understand where you're coming from.
Another point you just made was if a body was in a local area or like a local state, so like Tennessee, Alabama, what happens if, for example, someone passes away in Texas, has family within Georgia, they want to use your specific funeral home for their services because they have a relationship with you? Would you necessarily drive and go pick that up, or would you utilize airport
Yeah, we would
transportation?
utilize airport transportation, but I'll give you a couple of examples. A few weeks ago, we had a young lady pass away on her way to Savannah, and it was about 4.5 hours away, probably. What I did is, being involved in the Georgia Funeral Directors Association, I automatically knew a funeral home that I was friends with in Savannah. It was about 30 miles north of them, but I called this guy that I know. He drove to the local hospital, 30, 40 minutes maybe above Savannah, and then drove back to his funeral home so that I was able to tell the family that their daughter, was not in our care yet, but was in a good friend of ours' care. And then I sent two of my guys to Savannah. Took about 5 hours to get there, and then turn around and came back. And sometimes, depending on the situation, I may have gotten that funeral home in Savannah to go ahead and embalm the body, and then I would have paid them for the embalming charge that we normally would have charged the family. I just kind of like take that, and we don't make any revenue from embalming, because you can imagine we didn't do it. I hired another funeral home to do it. And then we go maybe the next morning to pick up the body. Now, if it's further than, gosh, probably 7, 8 hours, um, then we would get another funeral home involved. I would ask them to go pick up the body and embalm it, and then take it to the local airport. That be Houston, Texas, New York, wherever it is. And then what we do is we work with the air cargo department of Delta, and I don't know if you know this, a body has to be in like a wooden crate type container, and it is below the airplane, like where your luggage is. The people on the plane, because they can only see like sideways out the window, they never see a body unloaded. They do it respectfully. Delta does. They would unload that body first in the it's a wooden crate type thing, and they put it on a carrier and take it to air cargo. Just kind of give you a little logistics on it. If us three were going to the Atlanta airport right now, at some point you merge onto I-85. But if you were to stay on 75, about 10, 15 miles below Atlanta, on I-75 is a big sign that says Delta Air Cargo. And that is where we go and wait. We stay in our hearse and we wait for the airplane to land. And we've kind of figured it out through the years. If they say a plane is going to land at 5:30 p.m., the earliest we usually get the body in our hearse is probably about 6:30, 6:45. So we do go to the airport and wait on the body to get there, and then we drive from Atlanta back to Dalton.
Hey Dan, it's Harris Battle.
Hey
Just
there.
a couple questions for you, man. So like, have you ever had to experience anybody that has passed away overseas? Like, have you had to ever have to go through that process? And if you have, what all went into it?
It's a little easier. It would probably take a long time to explain. It's a little easier to get a body back to the U.S. than it is to send a body away from the U.S. Specifically, like we have Hispanic people in our community that sometimes want to send their loved one back to Mexico. It is very, very difficult. Because of the language barrier, but you have to go to near the Atlanta airport to the consulate's office and talk to them and tell them what you're wanting to do. And then there's somewhat of almost maybe like an attitude of, and maybe it just feels this way, Harris, but it's like, well, let us think about it and let us look over the paperwork, and we'll call you back in a day or two and let you know what we've decided. So then and you can't do it over the phone. So I had to drive to Atlanta just to hear that, drive back to Dalton and wait a day or two for them to call me and say, okay, we've considered it, come back and talk to us again and bring us a death certificate in Spanish.
Right.
And that's a little bit tough. I've had to get some help, I don't speak Spanish. So getting some of the words translated is a little tough. So there's times I've made 3 or 4 trips within 3 days to talk to this consulate that wants to talk face to face before we can even put a body on an airplane going to whatever city or country in South America. Now, not to talk your ear off, but like we had someone pass away in Italy on vacation a couple of years ago, and it was easier. I have a big red catalog. It's actually called the Funeral Director's Red Book. And I looked up some what we call transport services in some of the major towns in other countries, and they do speak English. It was broken English, but I understood them. And I coordinated with them to go to the local hospital, pick up this gentleman that passed away, prepare his body, put it in this wooden crate that I keep talking about, and get us an airline schedule going from, I can't even remember what town it was in Italy, once again to the Atlanta airport. We have a big advantage being somewhat close to Atlanta because it's like an international hub, for a lot of travel. So that's where we always get it.
So somebody does have to go over to like in person physically to pick up the body? To fly back with the body?
Yes. No one has to travel with the body. but yes, if somebody from that funeral home has to deliver the body to the airport, and then our guys would go to the airport to receive the remains.
I've got a question for you now, Dan. Now, I know you said nobody has to travel with the body, but let's say it's a military member. I know they'll usually send like a casualty assistance officer
They do.
with the body and the remains, sometimes two of them. Have you ever done any of that? Can you speak on what happens with that process with the military?
Yeah. Probably my experience with the military is that they just are almost over the top a little bit about it, but I get it. I get it. Like we had a funeral a couple of years ago for a soldier that passed away. The funeral was maybe like on a Sunday afternoon. And on Tuesday morning or Monday morning at 8 o'clock a.m., those two soldiers that had been sent to, I guess, the Atlanta airport, then they rented a car and drove to our funeral home, and they were here to help. But there wasn't really much for them to do. So they sat in our lobby of our funeral home all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, all day Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday. And then Sunday we had
In
the
their dress
service.
uniforms?
They were.
Yes.
I think the day they arrived, they were in their blues or something.
Mhm.
But then the other days, I think they were in like their camouflage outfits. But I even had them over to our house for dinner. I bought them a steak one night. You could tell. They would tell they were a little bit. I don't know, say bored, but there wasn't as much for them to do that two paid officers needed to be here all week long, you know. But it is what it is. They did a good job of making sure all the buttons were correct on the soldier, that his medals were in the right place. But once again, that maybe took like an hour. And there's a lot of phone calls too. They call to tell you when the flight's coming in. They call you back a couple hours later just to make sure that you wrote it down right. And then they call you the next day to make sure you are going to the airport. And I remember there was a lot of phone calls that I was almost like, yes, I've got it written down right here. We're going. Yeah, I gotcha. They were not annoying, but I mean, they're very much diligent to make sure nothing goes wrong.
Dan, I have a question on something you said earlier regarding COVID. COVID-19 has completely changed the outlook of the way many businesses operate. And I can only assume that that has changed some of your strategic planning when considering picking up a body that may or may not have been exposed to COVID. Can you speak on what precautions you take and how traveling with human remains that may or may not be exposed to COVID-19 may affect the way that you transport
Yeah.
them?
So when all this first came out, I guess we're talking March or April. As you can imagine, there were lots of theories out there of how you can get it and how you can't get it. I remember they've somehow over the last few months kind of disproved that it lives on a hard surface. The virus does, as long as they thought it did. At first, it was like sanitize everything from the walls to the ceiling, and then they kind of backed off some of that. Yeah, at first there was some worry that you could get it from a deceased person, but over the past few months, through the National Funeral Directors Association, they have pretty much proven that it is, I don't like to use the word impossible, but it is very rare that you could get COVID from a person that is not breathing a mist or air. But what we still do is if we go to the local nursing home and someone has passed away of COVID, we have a towel, a new clean towel. We disinfect it really good and gently lay it over the deceased face. Just to make sure that when you're pulling them onto like our stretcher, that even just a little bit of air isn't expelled. But we do wear masks and we do wear gloves, of course. So we've probably had maybe 10 or so COVID cases, not that many. And we have still had an open casket. We've embalmed the body. They have told us once the body is disinfected and embalmed and we take a few extra precautions with Lysol and stuff in some of the ears, nose, mouth area, that the virus is killed. And we have not had any problem letting you, for example, you and your family still view your grandmother.
So like when you're embalming people, how long is the window do you have in order to make that transport, like the transport of that body happen? Like, has there been a time where not everything went the right way and you had to, like, I don't know if you can re-embalm, or like what other like regulations or whatever processes did you have to go about in order to making that, like, if in a time crunch situation, like do y'all like I don't want to sound rude, but like one day ship kind of thing? Like I don't know. Like,
No, well, lots of situations are different. I have personally experienced, if someone passes away of drug overdose, for some reason, and me knowing a lot about the business, but yet not being a doctor or scientist, it seems that decomposition is much more rapid than someone who was not on drugs. Certain medications or chemotherapy and stuff people are on, it sometimes speeds up decomposition. But on an average person, you've probably got 24 hours or so to get the body into some type of refrigeration room. And then you've probably got another 24 to 36 hours to embalm the body before you would start to sense some smell, or sometimes their arteries and veins begin to just deteriorate. And that's what we use to embalm the body. We make an incision most of the time right here on the common carotid artery in the jugular vein. And it's a 1-point embalming where our little hose and cannula goes in, and we can embalm the whole body through that 1 point. Well, after a certain amount of hours, things just start to collapse and begin to decompose, and we cannot embalm the body anymore. Like it won't take the fluid, and like I said, more than anything, there tends to be some type of odor that comes out. And so, here's what you don't want, Harris. You don't want people in our community coming to the funeral home and being somewhat sickened or nauseated by some type of smell, you know? So, and it would embarrass the family. So we just tell the family, I'm sorry, as you know, sir, it was, uh, like, for example, I'll tell you one, someone had a car wreck one time, went off the side of a cliff, and no one found the car because it went down an embankment. We found it for 4 or 5 days. And at that point, we had to tell the family, I'm so sorry, but too much time has passed. We are not going to be able to embalm. But what we can do is we can use a memorial video and have you guys bring in pictures, and we'll have a slideshow of the person. And a lot of times I'll run to Office Depot and get like a big portrait made, and we put it in a frame and put it on an easel beside the closed casket, and try to do a few extra things to make them, I don't know, maybe try to compensate for not being able to view the actual body.
Dan, I have a question about the cremation. Like as you mentioned, like there's been body that haven't been found for like 4 or 5 days. What if that family decided to do a cremation and try to transport the ash to a national park, like Yellowstone National Park? Is there like a permit or regulation that you have to follow through for that?
There is permits to do a cremation. Um, but after the cremation is done, we have the family come back to the funeral home. We have them sign a release form that pretty much says that the cremains of John Doe are not the responsibility of Julian Peoples Funeral Home anymore, but they now are the responsibility of, whoever this family member is that's picking them up. So once they sign that waiver, the cremains, and we give the cremains in like a black thick plastic box if they choose not to buy an urn. Once they go to the family, they can do whatever they want to with them. If they go to a park, if they go on top of a mountain, or they go in the ocean, there's really not many regulations of what you can do with cremains. Now, I did hear a story, seemed like a year or so ago, that there was a person that got in big trouble because they snuck into the like Auburn football stadium in the middle of the night and spread the ashes over the 50-yard line. I think that was more trespassing and doing things like that without permission, you know. But if you're going to a national park, it never hurts to ask permission, you know. But I've never heard of someone getting in trouble for spraying ashes somewhere like that.
Well, Dan, I tell you, it's really interesting learning all this, and it sounds like a lot of information, like to the layman, you know, that you don't really understand or see what's really going on behind the curtain. And it seems like when you're dealing with all these international, even domestic, moving from state lines or different areas coming to your location, it seems like there's a lot of coordination that has to happen, a lot of networking, relationship building and fostering with different entities, you know, getting those interstate transfers, you know, you got to get those done quickly, like you said. So you've already got those relationships built. That's very impressive stuff.
Let me add something real quick. I feel like I didn't do a good job earlier saying, you know, we try to do it with compassion, because this is not like you're just moving a crate of you know, wood or something. It's not a container of goods, so to speak. I mean, this is someone's loved one. So we try to do it as efficiently as possible, try to do the best job possible. For example, I always call families when I'm at the airport, and I say, hey, Stephen, I just want to give you a call that I'm at the Atlanta airport and I have your mother in my care now, just to give an update, you know, because you're out
That
there
reassurance.
wondering, where are they? Are they, you know, then when I get back to the funeral home, I'll call a couple hours later and say, Stephen, just want to let you know that your mom is here at the funeral home now with us. A lot of funeral homes have not let people view their loved ones, or they've not had funerals that much during the last few months with the COVID. We have not been as tight on that, because I, in my heart, realize that when a man and woman are married for 40 years and they spend every day together, who am I to look at them and say, nope, you are not seeing your wife. We got a COVID-19 going on. We don't want anybody in the building. You know, the only thing we're going to do is just go bury them, and we'll call and tell you when after the burial is done. We're not doing that. We're not. I respect people too much, but I'm trying to balance. I didn't want some COVID outbreak to happen either at our funeral home. So we have about 10 different locations of hand sanitizer. We have a sign that we offer masks. And then we have a sign that says, you know, please refrain from touching or kissing or hugging the deceased or the immediate family members. But then, so I try to keep a monitor on it, you know, Stephen, but I really want families to leave here knowing that they got to have a good final goodbye to their loved one. It wasn't like, you know, we just put up the brick wall and said, no, you're not doing anything. Because, I mean, this is you know, the funerals, I mean, it's almost like the same precious moment of a wedding. I mean, it's never going to happen again. This is a one-time opportunity. And who am I to say you can't see your son, you can't see your daughter? So we try in every way during the last 9 months or so to help fill families' wishes, but we try to do it in a safe way.
That's great. Well, Dan, we're gonna have to wrap this up, and I hate to go because I could keep listening to you talk about this all day long. It's pretty impressive stuff. But I just want to go ahead and thank you on behalf of my team here, as well as the rest of my classmates that you don't see, cohort 3 at Georgia Highlands College in the Logistics and Supply Chain Management program. And thank you for your time, and thank you for what you do. You know, a lot of people probably don't fully understand like what you do and don't appreciate it. And it's a very valuable service that you provided to the community and to the residents.
Yeah,
Thank
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks.
And